My name is Ryan Clegg, 28, born and raised in the backwoods of Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. If you've ever driven I-81 north of Wilkes Barre, you've probably passed within 5 miles of my house. My dad used to say the only reasons you'd come out this way were to hunt, hide a body, or dig rocks out of the earth. I guess he wasn't far off. If you're reading this, it means I finally worked up the balls to write it down. What really happened at Redwater Quarry. Maybe you'll believe me, maybe you'll laugh your ass off. Most likely, you'll scroll past, thinking it's just another bullshit AI story. That's fine. I didn't set out to convince anyone. I just need to get it out. Maybe then I can sleep for more than 2 hours without waking up clawing at the sheets. The night air in Luzerne County was a dry ache, the kind that made your nose bleed and your teeth feel loose in your gums. It was March, 2 in the morning. We were late. Darren made sure of that. That damn idiot. Jesus Christ, Clegg. Are you gonna nurse that thing or what? He leaned over from the passenger side, twirling a ratty piece of paracord around his fingers. The cab reeked of Red Bull and the chemical musk of cheap cologne. He'd started calling me by my last name again, like we were back in high school and not grown men about to siphon diesel from a closed-off quarry. I'm making sure it doesn't flood, I said, cranking the ignition. The old Silverado sputtered, caught, and then rumbled into a sullen idle. I checked the mirrors even though there was nothing out there, just the sagging fence, the spill of sodium vapor from a dead-end streetlight, and then the world falling off into black forest and half-frozen swamp. Darren grinned, all gums and broken incisors, and slapped the dashboard. Attaboy. Now drive before I freeze my balls off. The quarry gates weren't even locked, just a shiny no trespassing sign zip-tied to the bars. Everyone in town knew Redwater was shut down, pending investigation. The official story was that it was a workplace safety incident. The unofficial story was that blood was sprayed halfway through the pit, and a guy named Trotsky had been zipped up in 3 separate bags. The pit was a sinkhole in the earth, a 60-acre pucker ringed with broken skids and tons of rusty earth-moving machines. Nothing moved but the fog, which pooled in the basin like something alive. Every so often, the beam from the radio tower blinked red above the trees, in time with my pulse. "Where do you want to start?" I asked. My voice came out thin, threadbare as the fabric on the bench seat. Darren shaded his eyes, not that it helped with the fog. "The dozer's still parked by the hoppers, right? That's got a 100-gallon tank easy. It'll have a lock on it." I felt dumb as soon as I said it. Darren had brought a bolt cutter, and even if he hadn't, there were at least 4 other ways to open a fuel cap if you didn't care about causing damage. He rolled his eyes. "Then we break it." "Shit. We're not here for the customer satisfaction survey, Clegg. Pull up behind it and kill the engine." I did, squeezing the truck between a half-stripped grader and the bone-white cliff face of the east wall. The ground here had been salted with sodium chloride after the incident, but you could still see the stain if you looked close. A greasy Rorschach spatter frozen into the gravel. I kept my eyes on the rear view. My skin crawled as I remembered stories from when I worked here, about the foxes and coyotes that got into the equipment sheds, gnawed on the insulation, and crapped on the seats. But nothing in those stories ended with a man's face peeled off like a Halloween mask. Darren shouldered the door open and hit the ground running, bolt cutter in one hand, red plastic jerry can in the other. He did a little 2-step, stamping his boots against the cold, then disappeared into the fog. I killed the ignition and pocketed the keys, then slipped out and ran after him, carrying another 2 jerry cans. The quarry was a dead zone for any living thing. No birds, no wind. Darren was already at the dozer when I caught up, crouched low against the hulking machine like he was afraid it might spring to life. The fog clung to his jacket, beads of moisture catching in the beam of my flashlight as I swung it toward him. "Hold that steady," Darren hissed, jerking his chin toward the fuel tank. He planted the bolt cutter's jaws around the padlock and gave it an experimental squeeze. "Cheap-ass master lock," he muttered, like we weren't both about to commit a felony over maybe $300 worth of diesel. I kept the flashlight aimed at the tank, trying to ignore the way the fog coiled through the light's beams, twisting and curling like fingers. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The silence out here was unnatural, pressing in on my ears until I could hear every creak of my own bones. I gripped the plastic handle of the flashlight tighter, forcing myself to focus on the task. Darren adjusted his grip on the cutters, muttering something under his breath, probably in that half-cocked bravado way he always did when he was trying to psych himself up. With a grunt, he squeezed, and the bolt cutter's blades bit into the lock with a dull snap. The padlock was gone in an instant. He worked the siphon line into the tank, then motioned for me to hand him the first can. I did, glancing nervously around the yard. The excavators all looked the same in the dark, hulking, prehistoric bugs, but I could swear the shadows didn't line up. Some looked like they'd shifted an inch in our direction, probably a trick of the light. Diesel coughed into the jerry can, and the smell hit me. Oily, sharp, a chemical note that buried itself in your sinuses. I fought the urge to gag, thinking of all the times I'd gone home with this stink on my jacket when I worked here. My niece wrinkling her nose and calling me Uncle Grease. It took only a minute to fill the first can, and then Darren swapped it out, moving with the quick, jittery efficiency of a man who's done this too many times. He didn't talk, just kept his head down and worked, as if every second was borrowed from somewhere else. I watched the tree line in the distance. Once something flickered in the fog, a glint, or a pair of eyes catching the moon. But when I looked again, it was gone. 5 cans later, we'd made a small puddle of footprints in the frost, and my nerves were shot to hell. "Let's bail," I said. "This is enough." Darren looked up, his face pale and sweaty. "You kidding? There are at least 3 more tanks over by the conveyors. Besides, you hear that?" I listened. There was a sound, faint and far away. Not machine and not wind. Maybe an animal, or maybe just the quarry settling. "No, I don't hear shit exactly," he said, flashing that grin again. "Perfect time to hit the office trailer, too. Bet they left a few bottles behind when they bailed." I didn't want to go. I really didn't want to go. Darren looked at me, then smiled. "You still scared of that shit? It's all bullshit, Clegg. Coyotes don't kill grown men. Trotsky probably overdosed, and nobody wants to say so for the insurance." "That's not what I heard," I said, recalling the rumors I had heard, about what they found and what they didn't, about the footprints, bare, clawed, human-sized, weird as hell, about the way the dogs at the canine unit wouldn't go within 100 yards of the pit. They just howled and pissed themselves until the handlers gave up. I didn't say any of that. Just that they never found his head, I said, and the bite marks didn't match a coyote, or even a bear. Darren laughed, a little too loudly. "F off. You know what else doesn't match? Our goddamn bank accounts. So unless you want to split $50 between us for the rest of the month, let's finish the job." Before I could respond, Darren was already moving, dragging the cans behind him into the darkness. I lingered, telling myself it was to make sure we weren't being watched. But really, I just wanted a wall between me and whatever was out there in the woods. When I finally caught up, Darren was already halfway to the conveyor, boots slipping on the slick ground. Suddenly, Darren stopped dead in his tracks, nearly causing me to stumble into him. "Holy shit," he muttered, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the fog. His flashlight beam swung to the left, catching on something that made my stomach twist before I even understood what I was looking at. There, just past a line of orange safety cones half sunk in the dirt, was a mangled pickup truck, a battered Ford Ranger, blue beneath a film of grime, the kind of truck you saw everywhere and nowhere at once. But I recognized it immediately. Trotsky drove that model. Drove past tense. The longer I stared, the more details resolved into place. Orange safety cones tilting drunkenly in the mud, splinters of plastic and glass littering the ground like the aftermath of some absurd party. The vehicle's front end was folded back on itself, like it had hit a wall and then kept going out of spite. The hood creased in a sharp V. The bumper and grille were punched deep into the engine bay. The windshield had taken the worst of it, a single, massive crater in the driver's side. all radiating cracks and thick black streaks. Something coppery and sticky had long since dried along the edges, curling in rivulets down to the cowl. They'd covered the whole thing in police tape at one point, but now the ribbons just hung slack from two rusty rebar posts, fluttering in the breeze with a sound like distant applause. Neither of us spoke. The fog made the colors more vivid. The blood stood out, a blackish rust against the glass. Staring at it, I felt the bottom drop out of my gut in a way I hadn't since I was a kid, and crashed my BMX into a parked car, certain for a moment that I was dead. My knees wanted to give, but Darren held me upright, a beefy hand pressing into my shoulder as if I'd tried a bolt. A cold, briny odor drifted from the cab, even from 30 feet away. The wind must have shifted. I remembered the story, how they found Trotsky in the seat, or what was left of him. My hand clamped tighter on the jerry can, knuckles gone white, and for a moment I almost believed I could hear his voice rattling in the cab, screaming for help. Darren took a cautious step forward, breaking the spell. "Come on," he said, not bothering to keep his footsteps quiet anymore. "Let's take a look." Despite wanting nothing more than to get the hell out of there, I followed, because to stay behind was even worse. The truck grew larger and more menacing with each step, the details sharpening into focus until it was impossible to look away. The roof was actually caved in over the driver's seat, the side mirror hung by a single wire, spinning lazily in the breeze. The driver's door was mangled and scratched to hell, as if something had tried to claw its way inside. I knelt for a second, more out of reflex than investigation, and ran my thumb over the claw marks. I'd seen raccoons do that to trash cans, but these were something else entirely. Whatever had done this was big and strong as hell. Darren peered inside and whistled. Jesus, they didn't clean it out. I steadied myself and looked through the broken window. The seat was gone, or rather, it was there but in shreds, foam and fabric slashed and scattered across the footwell. The dash was peppered with what I hoped was just mud, but knew wasn't. In the back seat, a hard hat and a thermos tumbled in a pile, both spattered with the same dark stuff. The keys were still in the ignition. Darren laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Well, shit. Doesn't look like it was coyotes after all," he said. I didn't answer. Somewhere deep in the pit, something shifted, metal on stone, like the quarry itself had just taken a breath. The silence in the quarry became more than an absence of sound. It was a presence, pressing in around us until my breathing felt too loud, my heartbeat a drum echoing against stone. The fog lay heavy, cold fingers that wound their way into the joints of my bones, making them creak. We stood there, Darren and I next to the wreck of Trotsky's truck, as if tethered to a reality we didn't want to acknowledge. Then came the scraping, a sound like metal being dragged over rock, distant and forlorn, but gradually moving closer. I shot a glance at Darren, hoping for some reassurance, but his expression was a mirror of my own, a cocktail of fear and denial. "You hear that?" His voice came out in a strained whisper, almost as if afraid to disrupt whatever dark enchantment lay over this place. I nodded, unable to find my voice, every hair on my body standing rigid against the chill. I turned the flashlight off, suddenly feeling exposed. The darkness closed in, but it was the lesser of two evils. The real horror was in knowing something out there was moving, maybe the same something that had torn the truck and its occupant to pieces days earlier. Low, rhythmic breathing joined the scraping sounds, thick and labored, as if something enormous was struggling just to exist. It reminded me of when my dad was on oxygen in his final months, the way his breaths had become a constant battle. My throat clenched, an instinctual response from a time when humans still feared the predators lurking at the edges of the firelight. Darren cursed under his breath, and I heard the dull thud of him retreating a step, bumping against the dented hood of the Ranger. Then, out of the fog, it came. First a shadow, a distortion against the gray nothingness, a towering shape that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, becoming more real with each sluggish step it took toward us. It emerged slowly, giving us time to absorb every ghastly detail. It walked on two legs, manlike, but the shape of the head, it didn't quite make sense. The instinct to see was stronger than the instinct to hide, so I clicked the flashlight back on before I was even aware of my finger moving. The cone of light sliced through the fog and landed square on a nightmare made flesh. What stared back at me was not a man, not even close. Its face was a mask of predatory hatred, stretched and warped into something that might have once been human, but was now a cruel exaggeration of a wolf's skull. The snout was somewhat elongated and ripped with scars and seemingly fresh wounds. Its lips peeled back from black gums, and rows of teeth so jagged and overgrown that they looked like broken glass jammed into decaying meat. The ears, short but sharply pointed, twitching as they triangulated our every movement, stood upright, giving it a look of animal alertness that was almost mocking. There was no mistaking the malice in those human-like eyes, glinting with an intelligence that spoke of a long-forgotten humanity twisted into this abomination. Its chest was matted with a coat of coarse fur slicked dark with either mud or blood. Its hands hung low at its sides, fingers tipped with black claws that curled like small sickles. The legs bent backward at the knee, more canine than human, and its feet were huge, splayed, and taloned, built for running as much as ripping through flesh. The thing moved with a confidence that bordered on the obscene, each step slow and deliberate, as if it knew exactly how paralyzed we'd become just by the sight of it. The fog roiled around its waist, hiding and revealing, in alternating flashes, the sinew and muscle that powered this absurd freak of nature. Its breath came in wet, bubbling rasps, each exhalation fogging the air in front of its muzzle. The stench hit me a second later, coppery and sweet, like the inside of the local butcher's shop when the power was out after a summer storm. In that moment, the boundaries of reality fractured. Evolution had never prepared me for the sight of something that should not exist, and every cell in my body screamed for flight, even as my feet stuck to the gravel. The monster blinked, almost thoughtfully, and cocked its head, mimicking the hesitation of a curious dog. But the way it did so radiated a dark intelligence, a sense of play in the hunt. The flashlight slipped from my grasp, clattering to the ground, its beam casting erratic shadows as it rolled. Darren choked on a breath that sounded suspiciously like a sob. I found myself stumbling back, my feet moving of their own accord, as the beast once again drew closer. When Darren broke into a run, it wasn't a decision. It was instinct, pure and unrefined, and like a mirror, I followed. The moment his sneakers hit the ground, every synapse in my brain fired, screaming for motion. My body reacted, adrenaline snapping me back into my skin, muscles jolting like overwound springs. The quarry dissolved into a blur of gray and shadow, my surroundings smearing into an indistinct panorama of gravel, rusted metal, and that damn oppressive fog. The pit became a labyrinth, somewhat familiar in daylight, but alien and treacherous under the smothering darkness. Heavy machinery loomed out of nowhere, hulking, inanimate beasts locked in a deep slumber. Somewhere in the distance, the creature pursued Darren, whom I had lost sight of the second we started running. A wailing crescendo of terror and fight or flight, resonating off the quarry walls. My breath hitched at each echoing snarl, yelp, and scream, a nightmare concert between predator and prey. And though part of me urged me to find him and help, self-preservation dragged me in the opposite direction. The loaders and graders emerged from the mist in front of me, their bulk dimly illuminated by the scant moonlight. Panting heavily, I dashed toward the relative sanctuary of the nearest piece of machinery, a massive front-end loader. Sweat slicked my palms, turning the railing and the door handle into almost insurmountable obstacles as I scrambled to pull myself up toward the relative safety of the canton. Once inside, I managed to ease the door shut quietly and immediately locked it. The silence returned, a thick, palpable void only broken by the sporadic creaks of the loader's aging frame. I leaned back against the worn vinyl seat of the loader, making myself as small as humanly possible while trying to catch my breath and regain my senses. For a few minutes, An agonizing eternity. There was nothing. No sign of Darren or the creature. Only the phantom whispers of fear curling in my brain. And then came the sound of claws on metal. Close, but not too close. Maybe 2 or 3 machines over. A deliberate scraping rhythm that echoed faintly through the fog and vibrated through the steel bones of the loader. I flattened myself against the seat even more, every instinct urging me to disappear. I stayed motionless, forcing myself to listen, to assess the situation rationally. Every sound outside the cab seemed amplified, echoing through the loader as if the beast were lurking right behind me. But it wasn't. Each breath I took was a calculated risk, and the air inside was heavy with tension and my own sweat-stained fear, mingled with the cold air or seeping through the loose seals in the door. The implications were clear. Cold air seeping in meant my scent was leaking out. Somewhere outside, the creature was searching. Eventually, it would catch the molecules of my fear and sweat, no matter how hard I tried to merge with the seat. I needed a plan. I'd only worked the quarry for a few months the year before it shut down. Grunt stuff mostly. Fueling machines, checking gauges, sweeping out the loader cabs when the operators clocked off. But every so often, one of the old hands would let me move a machine a few yards, just to feel the power in those engines. I remembered the feel of the levers, the response of the hydraulics, the way the whole rig rocked on its suspension when the bucket lifted. I wasn't an operator, not really, but I knew enough to get it moving. My eyes darted to the controls, to the key stuck in the ignition. A small mercy from whoever had driven this thing last. My hand reached for it instinctively, fingers trembling as they closed around the cold metal. But even as hope flickered, reality crushed it. The loader was hemmed in on all sides. It sat backed up against the pit wall, so reversing was out of the question. On my left, a row of graders loomed, their massive blades overlapping like the jaws of a steel trap. To the right, another loader, smaller but still imposing, blocked the path with its bucket half raised, a tribute to the inexperience of whoever had parked it there. Directly ahead, the bucket of a monstrous excavator hung suspended, just high enough for it to smash right into my cab if I tried to gun it. I was at least 300 yards from the truck, and Darren's screams had come from that direction, so making a run for it on foot was out of the question. There was no winning scenario. The loader was a coffin, but at least for now, it was a closed one. I slid down off the seat, tucked myself into the cramped footwell, and waited. I kept my lips pressed together so tight they hurt, breathing through my nose in shallow, measured sips. The glass of the cab felt laughably thin, nowhere near enough to stop the thing that had torn through Trotsky's truck like it was nothing. A horrible, sick relief fluttered at the edge of my panic. Maybe it had gotten Darren. If it finished him off and feasted on him, maybe it would be satisfied. The thought was so wrong and shitty I almost vomited. But it was true. I pressed my face into my hands, squeezing my eyes shut against the rising tide of guilt. Darren was my oldest friend, but all my body wanted was to keep breathing, to stay hidden, to survive. The clatter of gravel against metal snapped me back, every muscle in my back pulling taut as piano wire. I forced my hands away from my face and peered up. Outside the smeared windows, fog curled around the loader in thick, impenetrable whirls. But the source of the noise wasn't hard to pinpoint. A tall, dark, hunched shape moved along the shadows of the grader to my right, sniffing, searching. It wasn't like in the movies, where the monster charges straight at you. This thing was methodical and patient. It circled the grader with an ugly, limping gait, one of its legs clearly impaired. I watched it in profile, the lumpy black fur, the hunched back that flexed with each step, the long arms dangling low so the claws scraped lines in the loose gravel. It paused every few steps to snuffle at the air, jaws opening and closing, tongue flicking out like a rattlesnake's. The head swung side to side, ears rotating, and for a second, I convinced myself maybe it hadn't noticed me. Maybe I could just stay here until sunrise, and it would eventually give up and crawl back into whatever hellish den had birthed it. But then its nose snapped up, tracking something invisible in the mist. It stood perfectly still, head cocked, nostrils flaring. For an agonizing 10 seconds, it didn't move. Then the creature turned directly toward the loader cab. I froze, mid-breath. My body didn't listen to my brain, which screamed at me to shrink into the floorboard, to become dust, to cease to exist. The thing turned, its muscles ratcheting taut underneath the battered hide, and I could see now that the right side of its snout gaped open with a fresh wound, a ragged flap of meat exposing the gleam of its teeth beneath. Blood, bright and arterial, splattered its fur, hot enough to steam in the cold air. Darren must have put up a fight. I bit down on the inside of my cheek, made myself small, and waited. It moved slowly around the loader, sniffing and listening, until it finally reached the front, where the bucket sat low against the gravel like a gaping jaw. It leaned forward, sticking its head into the bucket, seemingly intrigued. For a second, its whole body went rigid, every muscle quivering like a tuning fork. Then it took a step forward and stepped into the massive bucket, snuffling at the air, even licking at the old diesel stains and scabs of dried mud. It was a grotesque pantomime of curiosity, but underneath I sensed a cunning intelligence, an animal mind, yes, but one that had learned. The way it sniffed and stopped, doubled back, and investigated the bucket from every angle. It reminded me of the wrecking yard dogs that used to hunt rats in my uncle's shop. Wary, methodical, never wasting motion. It was trying to find me, but was clearly struggling. The loader reeked of countless men, years' worth of sweat, piss, food, and cigarettes, and maybe that confused it, for the moment, anyway. The beast put one foot deep into the bucket, then the other, testing the metal, its claws scraping twin corrugations into the battered steel. For a split second, it hunched there, head low, ears flicking, as if listening for the pulse of my heart. My eyes locked onto the control levers jutting out next to me and the ignition key, ready and waiting to be turned. I didn't think. I didn't have time to plan or strategize. I just acted. My arm snapped out, turning the key. The diesel engine coughed, then roared to life, the vibrations shivering up through the seat into my spine. The beast's entire body jolted upright, ears now flattened, more annoyed than afraid. Before it could react, I slammed my right hand onto the joystick and yanked it back hard. The huge bucket lurched upward with a squeal of hydraulics. The werewolf scrabbled for purchase as the scoop tipped backward simultaneously, throwing it off balance momentarily, while the bucket kept climbing to 25 feet, maybe more, above the gravel. The thing inside the bucket went apeshit, claws clattering, body slamming wildly against the walls as it tried to find purchase on the wet steel. I didn't hesitate. I yanked the dump lever, and the bucket flipped forward at its apex, a full 2 stories above the quarry floor. The werewolf, or whatever the hell it was, tumbled out like a rag doll, a tangled mass of fur, claws, and desperate windmilling limbs, then crashed onto the ground below with a sound I'll never forget. Not a howl, but a kind of wet, retching scream that vibrated all the way up the boom and into my teeth. It lay there for a second, limbs at impossible angles, a dark puddle already forming beneath its leg. The shock of what I'd done hit me, but it didn't last. The creature had landed badly, one leg twisted under its body in a way that made my skin crawl even from 30 feet up, but it was already clawing at the ground with its hands, trying to push itself upright, teeth frantically snapping at nothing, eyes burning with a hate that made every hair on my body stand up. My gaze snapped to the huge excavator bucket dangling right in front of me, the same one that had prevented me from driving off just minutes earlier. The answer to that problem was stupidly simple, but my brain had been too busy running disaster scenarios to consider the most obvious solution. The loader had a bucket designed for moving rocks the size of Volkswagens. The excavator's scoop was just another chunk of steel in its way. I didn't even have to do anything other than drive forward, as the loader bucket was already lined up perfectly. Why that hadn't occurred to me earlier, I still don't understand. I slammed the loader into gear and floored the pedal. The big diesel shuddered under me, a monstrous heartbeat, and the tires churned gravel as the machine began to move. The bucket at the front caught the excavator's scoop dead on, and the loader's momentum shoved it sideways, as if it were nothing more than playground equipment. The werewolf was a wreck of muscle and blood, still frantically clawing at the ground to escape on its 3 functional limbs. The 4th leg trailed behind, completely destroyed by the looks of it. I aimed the loader right at its midsection and kept pushing my foot down. At the last second, the creature managed to jerk its body sideways, scrambling just out of the direct path of the tire, but not quite fast enough. The left-hand front tire caught the foot of its one good leg, crushing it into the gravel before the rest of its body dragged free. It let out another roar, part pain, part fury, that echoed through the pit and into my chest like a war drum. Despite now having 2 ruined legs, the creature didn't stop. With an unnatural burst of strength and sheer desperation, it began dragging itself away into the fog with surprising speed, much faster than seemed possible, considering the amount of damage its body had just sustained. I eased my foot off the throttle, breath catching in my throat, and watched it disappear without another sound. For the first time in what felt like hours, I allowed myself to breathe, still trembling from head to toe. That's when the headlights flared up in the distance, 2 pale beams slicing through the mist like a ghost ship breaching the edge of a storm. I blinked hard, unsure if I could trust my eyes. Instinctively, I flipped on the loader's headlights, hoping to flag down whoever was out there. The beams cut through the fog like twin searchlights, and to my shock, my own Silverado burst out of the haze, engine growling, tires crunching gravel. Darren was behind the wheel. My heart nearly stopped. He was alive, battered, pale, but alive, and so was driving my truck. I didn't waste a second. I threw open the cab door and scrambled down the steps without bothering to shut off the engine. My boots hit the ground hard, and I sprinted the last few yards. The moment I reached the truck, I yanked the door open and climbed in. Darren didn't say a word. He spun the wheel and floored it, throwing gravel as the truck whipped around and tore out of the quarry, bouncing onto the forest road that led back toward town. Only once we were past the gates and speeding under the canopy of trees did I glance over and saw the state of his arm. His left sleeve was shredded, soaked through with blood, and beneath it, I could see deep gouges torn through the flesh of his upper arm. "Jesus, Darren," I muttered, voice cracking. He didn't look at me. "It's nothing," he said through gritted teeth. "Just drive. We need to get as far from that thing as we can." I tried to argue with him on the way back, told him we had to get to the hospital, that he needed stitches, antibiotics, something, but my words bounced off him like rubber bullets. He kept shaking his head, more angry than scared, said he couldn't afford it. No money, no insurance. Eventually, I gave up, letting him win the argument, as I always did when he got that look in his eyes. That turned out to be a mistake, a big one. Over the next few days, something took hold of Darren, something no one could explain. It started with a fever that spiked so high he couldn't see straight. His skin turned blotchy, first red, then grayish, like the blood beneath was pulling back from the surface. He shook constantly, sweating what looked like gallons into the sheets. Then came the pain. He said it felt like fire ants were crawling through his bones, chewing their way out. His fingernails turned black, then fell off entirely. The gouges on his arm festered and split, not just infected, but necrotic, the flesh around them turning hard and dark like burnt leather. His pupils dilated until his eyes were nearly black, and after a few days, he stopped making sense, babbling in half sentences about things he could smell and hear that weren't there. It was like his mind was falling apart in lockstep with his body, decaying, breaking down, losing cohesion piece by piece. By the time I finally convinced him to go to the hospital, it was too late. His organs were already failing, one by one. The doctors ran every test they could think of, pumped him full of antibiotics, antivirals, antifungals. None of it mattered. His own immune system was attacking his body like it had declared war. Something had been transmitted to him that night. Something no one seemed to understand even one bit. I stayed with him until the end, helpless, watching the life bleed out of the only person I'd ever call a brother. I still blame myself for not forcing him to go that night, even though I am convinced it wouldn't have made a difference in the end. The beast that crawled away from the loader that night never came back. Not to Luzerne County, at least, but I don't sleep well anymore. Some nights I wake up choking on my own breath, swearing I can still hear claws on metal or the horrible screams this thing made when I crushed its body. Other times, I dream of Darren, alive, twisted, his skin gray, and his eyes bottomless black, whispering that he's cold, so cold. I live a quiet life now, moved to a different part of the state, and tried to leave those memories behind. But I know that thing is still out there. Maybe it's healing, maybe not. But it can't be the only one of its kind. All I can do is stay away from the woods and pray that I never have to see anything like it ever again.